If you've ever thought being a knight sounded glorious, chivalry, shining armor, epic quests, you might want to lie down before you hear the truth. Because under all that polished steel and noble legend was a life full of cold mornings, bad food, aching joints, and more than a few really awkward silences. It wasn't all sword fights and dragon slaying. In fact, most of it wasn't. Most of it was waiting, or walking, or shivering in your chainmail, wondering what that smell was, and realizing, horribly, it was probably you. Our story begins not with a battle, but with a sore foot. Sir Aldrich of Braemore had been limping since dawn. He didn't want anyone to know, of course. Knights weren't supposed to limp. Knights were supposed to stride. But after riding for 3 days through rain and hard stone paths, even his pride was starting to give way to a dull, grinding pain near the base of his left heel. He suspected it might be a blister, or a broken bone, or some curse from that hedge witch in Belhaven who looked at him strangely 2 weeks ago. He wasn't sure. Knights weren't taught much about feet. The sun was barely up, the sky a grayish smear, and already his squire was chattering. "You know, sir, my uncle once had a foot injury that turned green," said Tom, who was 12 and had the energy of someone who hadn't been hit with a sword yet. They had to cut off 3 of his toes. Said it was noble rot. Though, come to think of it, that might have been the wine cellar. Sir Aldrich didn't answer. He just grunted and shifted in his saddle, trying to find a position that didn't press against the mysterious, possibly cursed wound. His horse, Bramble, snorted in sympathy or boredom. It was hard to tell which. They were heading to Castle Wicklow, where Aldrich had been summoned by Lord Grieve to attend a matter of importance. That usually meant one of 2 things. Someone had stolen something from the kitchens again, or someone had died in a way that was inconvenient. Either way, it would involve standing around while the real work got done by servants or stewards and pretending to be terribly concerned. Not that Aldrich minded. Being a knight wasn't really about action, not these days. Not since the king had declared peace 2 winters ago and all the fun sort of dried up. No more border raids. No more justs. Just a lot of ceremonial visits and being asked to bless babies. The road wound through low hills and foggy pastureland. Sheep stared blankly at them as they passed. Tom tried to talk to one, as he often did. "Good morning, ladies sheep," he said to a particularly woolly one, doffing his cap. "I hope your grass is up to standard today." Sir Aldrich sighed. "You'll scare it. She looks wise. Don't you think she looks wise? She looks like she wants you to fall in a ditch." Tom grinned. "Then I die happy, sir." They arrived at Wicklow near midday. The castle loomed out of the mist like something half-remembered from a dream. Square towers, damp walls, moss creeping into the cracks. It wasn't a beautiful place, but it was solid, dependable, and just drafty enough to remind you that comfort was not a medieval virtue. As they dismounted, a steward in gray robes greeted them with a nod. "Sir Aldrich, Lord Grieve awaits you in the great hall." "Does he?" Aldrich said, barely keeping the groan from escaping. "Has he been waiting long?" "Since yesterday." "Well, that bodes well." Tom stayed behind with the horses while Aldrich trudged inside. The hall was dark, lit only by a few sputtering torches and one high window that let in a crooked beam of light. Lord Grieve was seated at the far end, half swallowed by his fur-lined chair, his elbows resting on a table covered in parchments. "You took your time," he said without looking up. "I walked," Aldrich replied. "That slows a man down." Grieve finally looked at him. His face was pale, sharp, as if someone had carved it with a kitchen knife. "We have a problem." "Don't we always?" Grieve stood. "This one smells worse than usual." Aldrich waited, but Grieve didn't elaborate. Instead, he walked slowly to the side wall, where a heavy tapestry hung depicting the conquest of something or other, probably a pig. Grieve tugged it aside to reveal a small wooden door. "You remember Sir Keelan of Froxford?" Aldrich frowned. "The one with the enormous eyebrows." Grieve nodded. "Found him in the well. That's a bad place to keep a knight. He was face down. No wounds. No signs of a struggle. Just dead." Aldrich stepped closer. "Did he jump?" "Not likely. His boots were dry." Aldrich said nothing for a long moment. Then, "So what do you want from me?" "Investigate." "No," said Grieve. "I wanted to keep people calm." The other knights are already whispering. And you know how they get when they whisper? Paranoid, hungry. They always want to feast after a good panic. He handed Aldrich a folded letter. It bore the wax seal of the crown. Aldrich didn't open it. What's this? An order. You're to remain at Wicklow for the season. Aldrich raised a brow. That's 4 months. Yes. In this place. Yes. With those beds. Yes. Aldrich sighed. Wonderful. He left the hall with the letter unopened, stuffing it into a pouch by his side. Outside, Tom was busy trying to juggle 3 apples, one of which was clearly rotten. Good news? The boy asked. No such thing, Aldrich muttered. We're staying. Tom's eyes lit up. Really? Do they have rats? I like rats. You'll fit right in. By nightfall, the castle was colder than Aldrich remembered. The wind had a way of crawling down your collar and whispering things you didn't want to hear. He sat in his assigned chamber, a stone box with a window that didn't shut, and looked out at the black fields beyond. Somewhere in the dark, wolves were howling. Or something was. He couldn't sleep. He didn't try. He wrapped his cloak tighter around his shoulders and watched the torchlight flicker along the walls. Somewhere beneath his feet, the servants' hall creaked. A door slammed in the distance. Probably the wind. Probably. In the morning, he would speak to the other knights. Try to see what they knew, or what they were afraid of. For now, he waited, and the wind whispered again, softer this time. The first person Aldrich found the next morning was Sir Owen, which was unfortunate. Owen had the rare gift of speaking for 20 minutes without saying anything, and another rarer talent of always assuming he was the smartest man in the room, regardless of evidence. Aldrich had known him for years, and still wasn't sure if Owen was clever, or just well-fed. They met in the practice yard, where a few younger squires were half-heartedly sparring under the dull eye of a retired captain. Owen stood near the edge, arms crossed, wearing a fur-trimmed cloak that looked borrowed from someone richer. I heard about Keelan, Aldrich said, without preamble. Owen's brow lifted. Did you? Tragic. Very tragic. Found in a well. An undignified way to go, isn't it? Aldrich tilted his head. That's all you have to say? What would you like me to say? Owen asked, flicking some dust from his cuff. That he was cursed? Poisoned? Dragged into the afterlife by ghostly hands? Men die, especially when they get older. His beard was practically white, you know. He was 42. In knight years, that's ancient. Aldrich watched Owen's eyes. There was something there, maybe amusement, maybe discomfort. Was he acting strangely before it happened? We're all acting strangely, Owen replied. We're stuck in a stone box with rats, bad ale, and worse gossip. It makes a man twitchy. So you have heard the gossip. Owen didn't answer that. Instead, he looked out over the yard, where a young boy had just dropped his wooden sword and was being scolded by an older squire. I miss war, he said softly. Aldrich raised a brow. Do you? Better than this. At least in battle, you knew who the enemy was. Here, everyone's your friend until they're not. That was more honest than Aldrich expected. He gave a grunt of agreement and turned to leave, but Owen stopped him. Be careful what you ask, Aldrich. There are ears in these walls. Aldrich glanced at the stone. Thick ears, then. Still, Owen said. They listen. That night, the castle held a supper for the visiting knights and gentry. It was not a feast exactly, more of a slightly warm gathering with turnips. The long table in the hall creaked under the weight of trenchers and candle wax, and everyone sat a bit too close together, pretending to enjoy each other's company. Tom was seated near the servants' table, eating with enthusiasm and little grace. Aldrich sat between 2 men he barely knew, Sir Edrin, who smelled like boiled leather, and Sir Folly, who never blinked. The talk was low and cautious. They say he didn't scream, Folly murmured, slicing a potato into perfect squares. The man who found him, Jarek, the groundskeeper, said it looked like he just gave up. People don't give up into a well, Aldrich muttered. Folly shrugged. Maybe someone helped him. Edrin snorted. I don't know why you're all whispering. He was probably drunk. Tripped over his own shadow. That's how most knights go out these days. Folly gave Edrin a look. Do you trip forward into a sealed well, then seal the top behind you? Edrin turned to Aldrich. You're the one who's been asked to stick around. Any guesses? I don't guess, Aldrich said. I wait. That silenced them for a while. The candles burned lower. A servant came by with more ale, and someone at the far end of the room laughed too loudly. Later that night, as Aldrich was heading back to his chamber, he passed the chapel. The door was slightly open. Inside, he heard humming. He pushed the door gently. At the front of the chapel stood a young woman in plain robes. She was lighting candles at the altar, humming something old and tuneless under her breath. When she saw him, she stopped. "Forgive me," Aldrich said, about to leave. "You're Sir Aldrich," she said, not asking. He nodded. "Yes. I heard you were coming. Lord Grieve said you're meant to make people feel safer. I think he means for me to look serious and pretend to care." She gave a small smile. "Well, it's a start." He stepped inside. "You're the priestess?" "Caretaker," she said. "The priest died last winter. No one's bothered to replace him, so I keep the place tidy." "What's your name?" "Lena." "Lena, do you believe in curses?" She looked at him for a long moment. "Is this about Sir Keelan?" "It is." She nodded, walked to the back of the chapel, and picked up a small lantern. "Come with me." They walked through a narrow hallway behind the altar, down 2 steps, and into a low-ceilinged chamber that smelled faintly of ash. On the wall were dozens of old records, scrolls, scraps, bits of parchment bound together by string and mold. "There are things in here," she said, "from before even the first Lord of Wicklow, older than the stone. Some of them written in tongues we've forgotten how to speak." Aldrich looked around. "Is this allowed?" "Not really," she said, "but no one bothers me." She pointed to a small ledger. "I found something when Keelan died. He wasn't the first knight to die strangely here. There was one, Sir Alston, nearly 80 years ago. Found drowned. No wounds. No blood. Just water in his lungs. They said he must have slipped." "Into what?" "That's the thing," Lena said. "There was no well then. Not in that spot. Not for another 20 years. Aldrich stared at her. "So what did he drown in?" They never figured out. A long silence followed. Aldrich could hear the wind pressing at the stones outside, and somewhere deeper in the castle, the groan of old wood shifting in the dark. Lena turned down the lantern's flame. "Be careful, Sir Aldrich. Something in this place remembers things we've tried to forget." Aldrich didn't sleep that night, either. He sat by the window again, watching the clouds roll in, dark and low. Thunder grumbled on the horizon, slow and uncertain. Below, the castle grounds stretched out into the dark. A broken well, an empty courtyard, a world full of things that didn't quite add up. The torchlight flickered again, and this time, he could have sworn he saw a shape in the courtyard. Not moving, just standing. By morning, the shape in the courtyard was gone. Aldrich wasn't sure if he'd imagined it. He told himself he probably had. It had been a long day, a strange one, and the shadows had a way of playing tricks on tired eyes. Still, when he finally stepped outside after breakfast, he found himself scanning the same stretch of stone for footprints. None. Tom, cheerful as always, was already grooming Bramble in the stable yard. "Good morning, sir. You look less than enthusiastic." "I'm learning to manage my expectations," Aldrich muttered, blinking up at the cloudy sky. "What day is it?" "Wednesday, I think. Or maybe Thursday. Does it matter?" Aldrich scratched his jaw. "No, I suppose not." The courtyard was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels just a little too thick. A few stable hands moved slowly between chores, and someone was patching a window near the kitchens, humming off-key. Even the crows on the battlements were quiet this morning. Aldrich wandered for a bit, his steps slow, giving him time to think. He hadn't slept properly in 2 nights now, and it was beginning to gnaw at the edges of his mind, thoughts circling, bumping into each other, and then slipping out of reach. By midday, he found himself back in the main hall, where Lord Grieve was bent over a long parchment that looked older than either of them. "There was another one," Grieve said, without looking up. Aldrich's stomach sank. "Another what?" "Knight," Grieve said. "Sir Dannon. Found him in the South Tower." Aldrich exhaled through his nose. "Dead." Grieve nodded. "No blood. No signs of force. He was kneeling, like he'd been praying. But his eyes were—" He stopped himself. "Go on," Aldrich said. Grieve's jaw clenched. His eyes were open, wide open, like he'd seen something he couldn't make sense of. We had to close them before the servants noticed. Aldrich rubbed his temples. And you still don't want to call for a physician? Not yet. It'll start a panic. It might start a riot if you don't. Grieve gave him a tired look. We don't need a healer, Aldrich. We need someone to listen. Someone the others trust. Aldrich folded his arms. You're not saying it out loud. Grieve nodded slowly. Because I don't want it to be real. That afternoon, Aldrich returned to the chapel. Lena was there again, sweeping the stone floor in slow, steady motions. The smell of beeswax and old incense clung to the air. I thought you might come back, she said, not turning around. You were right, Aldrich said. There's been another death. She stopped sweeping. Same as the last? More or less. No wounds. No sound. Just gone. Lena leaned the broom against the wall. This place remembers. You said that before, Aldrich said, stepping closer. What does it mean? There's a story, she said softly. It's not in the records. I only heard it once, from an old steward who died last winter. He said there was a knight who swore an oath, something old, something before the church. He was buried beneath the castle, they think, in the first foundation. And ever since, something has stirred now and then. Not often, but when it does, it takes those who are bound to the same oath. Aldrich frowned. What kind of oath? Lena shrugged. He didn't know, only that it had to do with silence. With watching. With waiting. That's not very comforting. Neither is death in a well. He sat down on one of the wooden benches, which creaked under his weight. Do you believe it? I believe people tell stories when they don't have answers. But I also believe things happen that don't make sense. Aldrich looked down at the worn stone beneath his boots. You ever feel like this whole place is holding its breath? Lena smiled faintly. Yes, every day. Later, back in his room, Aldrich opened the letter Grieve had given him, the one with the royal seal. He'd forgotten about it for 2 days. The wax crumbled as he peeled it away. The message inside was short. Sir Aldrich of Braemore, you are hereby assigned to Castle Wicklow for a period of no fewer than 90 days, with full jurisdiction to investigate matters relating to knightly discipline, unexplained deaths, or other suspicious occurrences. You will act as the king's eyes and ears. Quietly, no title, no signature, just the crown's crest. He folded the paper slowly and tucked it into the pouch again. So it wasn't just a coincidence. Someone in the capital knew something was off, and they hadn't sent a physician. They'd sent him. That night, the wind rose again. It came from the west, sharp and whistling through the towers like a voice too faint to name. Aldrich couldn't sleep, so he walked the battlements. The stones were slick with mist, and his boots left damp prints wherever he went. He stopped near the south tower, the one where Dannon had been found, and leaned on the low wall, looking out into the blackness beyond. Then he heard something behind him. Not footsteps, not voices, just a shift in the air, like someone had stepped into the world without making a sound. He turned quickly. No one, just a tapestry fluttering gently against the stone and the faint creak of wood somewhere below. He stayed there for a long time, watching the dark. The following morning, the castle woke to fog. It was the thick kind, heavy and gray, swallowing sound and sight alike. From the battlements, you couldn't see the village. From the stables, you couldn't see the well. The entire world had narrowed to the space between walls. Sir Owen, of course, made a joke about it. God's breath, he called it, pulling his cloak tighter. Or maybe just another cursed omen. At this point, who can tell? Tom didn't laugh. Neither did Aldrich. By now, 3 knights were dead, each one under circumstances no one could quite explain. They were too old for accidents, too experienced for foolish mistakes, and too proud to go quietly. Aldrich had read the reports again that morning. He'd even gone down to the well and looked inside. Nothing. No water. Just stone and old rope and the faint smell of moss. Back in the armory, the squires sharpened blades with less enthusiasm than usual. Tom was there, pretending to polish chainmail, but clearly distracted. Aldrich gave him a look. Speak. Tom set the rag down. Sir, I know it's not my place, but have you considered the chapel? I've been. Really considered it. All those candles. All those old scrolls. It's the quietest part of the whole keep, and yet it's never empty. Even at night. You think Lena's involved. I didn't say that. Aldrich frowned. But you're thinking it. Tom hesitated, then nodded. She's not afraid like the others. That was true. Lena never seemed startled. Even when Aldrich had told her about Sir Danon, she'd barely blinked. He'd taken it as composure. But now he wasn't so sure. That afternoon, the fog still hadn't lifted. Aldrich returned to the chapel. This time, Lena wasn't sweeping. She was sitting alone in the front pew, staring at the altar. She didn't turn when he entered. "You've been watching," she said. "Yes. You think I know something. I think you know more than you say." She nodded slowly. "You're right." That took him by surprise. She stood, smoothing the front of her robes, and motioned for him to follow. They didn't go to the scroll room this time. They went deeper, down a narrow stair behind the altar, one Aldrich hadn't noticed before. The steps were stone and slippery with age. The air grew cooler as they descended, and the smell of earth and wax grew stronger. At the bottom was a small chamber. Just stone walls, a crude altar, and a few old symbols carved into the floor. One of them looked like an eye, the other a spiral. Aldrich had never seen their like. "This is the old chapel," Lena said quietly. "Before the church took hold. Before priests. Before books." Aldrich stepped carefully around the symbols. "What is this place?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she knelt by the wall and brushed aside some dust. Beneath it was a carving, faint but still visible. A knight, bent at the knee, offering a sword. Behind him, a figure without a face. No crown, no halo, just blank space where its features should be. "The knight who took the oath," Lena said. "He was the first." Aldrich crouched beside her. "You said he was buried beneath the castle." "He is," Lena whispered. "Somewhere near here. The foundation was built around his grave. They said his soul would guard the land. But things change over time. Stories fade. People forget what they promised. And now," Lena stood slowly. "Now I think the bargain is broken." Aldrich stared at the carving again. The knight's head was bowed. The faceless figure loomed behind him. Somehow, despite the crude style, the message was clear: submission, surrender, silence. "Why are the knights dying?" he asked. "I don't know exactly, but they're not the first. Every few generations, it happens again. A wave of deaths. A pattern. And each time, it stops as suddenly as it starts." Aldrich rubbed his jaw. "Why doesn't anyone say anything?" "They do," Lena said, "but no one listens. Or they leave before it's their turn. Or they go mad trying to understand." Back in the upper chapel, the candles were still burning. They flickered gently as they passed, casting long shadows on the walls. Aldrich paused at the door. "If I stay, am I next?" Lena looked at him for a long moment. "Maybe. Or maybe you'll find out what the others couldn't." Outside, the fog had begun to thin, but only slightly. The walls of the castle still felt distant, blurred at the edges, like a dream not yet fully woken. Aldrich walked the courtyard again, slower this time, tracing a loop from the stables to the well to the south tower and back. He found Owen leaning against the armory door, chewing on something tough and probably stale. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Owen said. Aldrich didn't smile. "What do you know about the knight who swore the first oath?" Owen blinked. "What knight?" "The one buried under the foundation. The one who—" Owen held up a hand. "Stop. I don't know what stories you've been listening to, but if you want to keep your head clear, I suggest you keep your feet above ground." Aldrich stepped closer. "So you do know. I know rumors. I know that people who go looking for old truths tend to find something else entirely. Like death. Or madness." Aldrich studied him. "You've seen something?" Owen's jaw tightened. "When I was a squire, we lost a knight. Sir Marek. He was strong, clever, sharper than most. One day he just disappeared. No trace. No fight. Gone. A few nights later, I woke up to find him standing at the end of my cot. Not breathing. Not blinking. Just staring. Then he was gone." Aldrich felt the chill again, that same stillness from the other night. "You never told anyone?" "I told one person," Owen said. "He called me a liar. He died a week later." He turned and walked away without another word. That evening, Aldrich didn't go to his chamber. He sat in the courtyard instead, beneath the high tower, with a lantern and a blanket, waiting. The fog was still there, thinner now, but stubborn. The torch by the west wall flared, and just before midnight, something moved behind the well. At first, Aldrich thought it was a shadow. Just a flicker, nothing more. The kind your eyes invent when you've been staring too long at something that doesn't move. But then it did move, slowly, like someone shifting their weight behind the well. He tightened his grip on the lantern's handle and rose to his feet, careful not to make sound. He didn't call out, didn't want to startle whoever or whatever was there. The night was quiet enough that his own breathing felt loud, his boots whispering against the damp stones as he stepped forward. Closer now, he could see the edge of a cloak. Frayed, dark with soil, not moving. Aldrich swallowed. Who's there? Silence. Then a small sound, barely more than a scrape, like fingers brushing stone. He moved to the side, angling the lantern to cast its light behind the well wall. Empty. Nothing. No one. He turned in a slow circle, scanning the yard. The fog was lighter than it had been, but still thick enough to hide someone 10 steps away. He took another slow step backward, ears straining for any hint of movement. Nothing. After a long moment, he let out a breath and lowered the lantern. The moment he did, a soft voice spoke behind him. Still watching, are you? Aldrich spun around. No one. His heart beat faster. He turned again, still nothing. He walked the perimeter, checked the door to the kitchens, the stables, even the base of the south tower. Everything was locked. Still. Silent. The voice hadn't sounded angry, or even loud. Just close. Familiar. Almost tired. He waited there another hour, sitting on the cold stone near the well, the lantern casting a circle of warmth around his boots. Eventually, the cold drove him inside. But he didn't go to his chamber. He went to the chapel again. Lena was already there. She didn't speak right away, just motioned for him to sit. He did. There's a pattern, he said softly. One comes. One goes. Always alone. No violence. No sound. Lena nodded slowly. And always at night. I saw something. Or thought I did. It wasn't clear. But someone was there. Then they've started showing themselves to you, Lena said, without surprise. You've seen them? Once. A long time ago. When I was still new here. A night. Sir Elric vanished without a trace. No one believed he was gone. They thought he ran. But I saw him the next night, just past the inner gate, standing still, staring at the tower. Then he turned and walked into the mist. And no one ever found his body. Aldrich rubbed his eyes. So we're dealing with ghosts now? Maybe. Or something older than ghosts. The knights who disappear never fight, never speak. It's as though they accept it, like they're surrendering. To what? I don't know. Back in the corridor, the air felt colder than it had in days. The stone walls had the smell of damp earth. Aldrich's fingers brushed the rough carvings near the chapel door as he passed. Spirals, circles, crude shapes he didn't recognize. At dawn, he finally slept. Only for a few hours. He woke to Tom shaking his shoulder. Sir, you need to come. It's happened again. Not a knight this time. A squire. Benedict. No more than 16. Found in the hayloft, curled up, as if asleep. Except he wouldn't wake. Breathing shallow. Pulse faint. His eyes wide open, unblinking. Alive. But not present. Aldrich knelt beside him. The boy's skin was cool to the touch. Not cold. Just off. Like he'd been elsewhere and only half returned. Did he say anything? Aldrich asked. The stable master shook his head. We found him like this. No marks. No wounds. Aldrich looked at Tom. Bring Lena. She arrived minutes later, clutching a folded cloth and a small vial of something sharp-smelling. She waved it beneath the boy's nose. No reaction. She checked his eyes, his breath, his hands. He's not hurt, she said softly. But something is keeping him. Keeping him. Lena looked at Aldrich. It's begun to reach wider. Later that day, Aldrich returned to the scroll room. Not the old one beneath the chapel. This was the one above the east tower, rarely used and filled with dust. The castle's original charter was there. So were some personal journals, lists of grain shipments, faded maps of the original fortress. But tucked between two rotting ledgers was something different. A single parchment, no title, no seal. The handwriting was neat but old. Strange spellings, short lines, almost poetic. He read it aloud to himself. A sword pledged in silence. A watch that never ends. Beneath the stone, it waits. Each oath binds one more. Eyes open. Voice gone. Still. It wasn't a knight's code. It wasn't a prayer. It felt like a warning. He folded the parchment and slipped it into his sleeve. Later, near dusk, he found Owen alone in the armory. The older knight was cleaning a blade he hadn't used in months, his hands steady, movements slow. "I saw something," Aldrich said. Owen didn't look up. "We all do, eventually." "I found a verse." It spoke of a sword, a vow, something waiting beneath the stone. Owen nodded once. "The Watcher." Aldrich raised an eyebrow. "You've heard that name?" "Once. From a knight who trained in the Western Marches. He said every old castle has one. Something buried. Something sworn to. Not alive. Not dead. Just waiting. And when the oaths are broken, it comes to collect." Aldrich sat on the bench across from him. "So what do? We wait. We listen. We remember who we are." "That doesn't sound like much of a plan." "It's the only one we've got." That night, Aldrich didn't sleep again. He sat by the fire in the small watchroom off the south corridor, turning the strange verse over in his mind. Eyes open. Voice gone. Still. He thought of Sir Danon, Sir Marek, Benedict. All of them silent. All of them left in stillness. No violence. No sound. Only eyes. Watching. The fire in the watchroom burned low by the time Aldrich rose. He hadn't heard footsteps, but something in the air had changed. The stone walls no longer felt still. They held a kind of pressure, as though the castle itself was listening. He opened the door into the south corridor. The torches there had burned out. Just beyond the archway, the fog had crept back inside. It was nearly dawn, though the sky outside offered no light. Just gray, soft, and unmoving, like the inside of a lidded eye. He walked slowly through the corridor toward the old storage chamber that sat between the south tower and the chapel. He didn't know why. Something pulled him there. He found the door ajar. Inside, the air was colder than it should have been. Not freezing, just unnaturally still. There was no sound, not even mice. The shelves were cluttered with old tools, ropes, buckets, lanterns that hadn't seen flame in years. But near the back wall, beneath a cracked and water-stained tapestry, the stone looked different, smoother, carved. Aldrich pulled the fabric aside. There was again the spiral, the eye. This time, a line of symbols ran along the base. He didn't know what they meant. They didn't match the local tongue. Didn't match Latin either. Just curling, looping shapes etched deep into the wall. He reached out and pressed his palm against the spiral. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the stone moved. A faint sound, like dry leaves rustling, rose behind the wall. He stepped back quickly. The sound stopped. That was all. No door opened. No passage revealed itself. But something had shifted. He could feel it. Aldrich left the room in silence, closing the door carefully behind him. Later, when the castle had fully woken and the fog lifted again, he found Lena outside in the herb garden. She was kneeling in the dirt, hands in the soil, planting something that looked like mint. "There's a symbol beneath the old tapestry," he said without greeting. She didn't look up. The spiral, and more, writing I don't recognize. I touched it. The wall moved. Now she looked at him. "It listened to you." "What does it mean?" "That it knows you're looking." He crouched beside her. "Lena, what are we actually dealing with?" She sat back on her heels. "The truth? I don't know. There are stories, old ones, about watchers beneath castles, bound to oaths made long before the current lords were born. Some say they were placed there to protect. Others say to punish. Either way, they respond to silence, stillness, surrender. When knights forget their place, or their vow, something beneath remembers it for them. But why now? She shrugged gently. Perhaps the silence has been broken. Perhaps the balance has shifted. Aldrich stood. Benedict is still asleep. I know. I've checked him twice. Will he wake? I don't know, she said again. But if he does, he won't be the same. That night a wind rose. The castle creaked and groaned like a ship at sea. Shutters rattled. The horses in the stable stamped their hooves, uneasy. Aldrich patrolled the courtyard with Tom. Neither spoke much. Just the sound of boots over stone the occasional thump of the gate chains clinking. By the well, Tom hesitated. "You ever wonder," he asked, "why night stopped drawing water here?" Aldrich tilted his head. "What do you mean?" "Years ago, before my time even, they say this was the only source. But the Lords had another well dug behind the kitchen. They sealed this one. But it's not sealed anymore." "No," Tom said, frowning. "Someone reopened it. But no one knows when." Aldrich peered into the well again. It went down farther than it should. The rope disappeared into blackness. No light bounced back. No sound returned when he dropped a pebble. "Feels wrong," Tom muttered. "Because it is." Back in the great hall, the nights were quiet. Sir Owen sat at the long table, head bent over a mug of wine. Sir Brant stood near the hearth, staring into the fire. No one spoke of the disappearances anymore. They pretended it was all coincidence. But no one had left the castle in days. No patrols. No hunts. It was as if they were waiting for something. Sir Brant broke the silence. "You ever heard of the Grey Watch?" Owen looked up. "That old legend?" Brant nodded. Said to be a group of knights who swore silence after seeing something they couldn't explain. They stayed in castles like this one, waiting, watching, never speaking again. "Didn't they all vanish?" Owen asked. Brant gave a faint smile. "That's the part one remember." Aldrich leaned forward. "What if the legends weren't just legends?" Brant gave him a tired look. "Then we're already too late." The next morning, the fog didn't lift. It thickened. The village couldn't be seen at all. Even the outer walls vanished into pale gray mist. Birds didn't sing. No one left their rooms except to sit quietly in the chapel or in the great hall with the shutters drawn. The castle was shrinking, folding in on itself. Tom came to Aldrich before dusk. "There's someone at the gate." "What?" "I saw a figure," he said, standing just past the outer arch. Not moving, just waiting. Aldrich grabbed his cloak and followed him. When they reached the gate, the figure was still there, barely visible through the mist. A tall shape cloaked, motionless. Aldrich stepped forward. "Who are you?" The figure didn't answer. Tom whispered, "Should we open it?" "No," Aldrich said. "Not yet." He raised his voice. "What do you want?" The figure didn't move. Then, very slowly, it raised one hand. Not threatening, just a gesture, a kind of summons. Then it lowered the hand again, turned, and disappeared into the fog. Aldrich didn't speak for a moment. Then he turned to Tom. "Double the watch. No one leaves the inner ward. You think it'll come back?" "I think it never left." That night, Aldrich didn't go to the chapel. He went to the well. Alone. He stood beside it for a long time, watching the black water, listening. The rope swayed slightly, though there was no wind. He leaned over the edge, held his breath, and waited. Somewhere far below, something moved. The rope at the well had stopped swaying. Aldrich leaned back from the edge, unsure what he'd even expected to see. There was no sound, no gust, no echo of a splash or a whisper from below. Just that awful stillness, heavier than silence. He stood there longer than he meant to, hands resting on the stone rim, watching the dark water, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling building in his chest. The courtyard around him was empty. Even the torches had gone out. A low mist hugged the base of the well and curled along the edges of the walls like it had a mind of its own. When he finally turned to leave, he saw Lena watching him from the far end of the courtyard. She didn't speak, just gave a small nod, and turned back into the hallway. He followed, his boots silent on the stones. Inside, the air felt heavier. Lena waited by the old hearth in the corridor between the chapel and tower steps. She wasn't holding any herbs or candles this time, just her hands folded in front of her. "There's something I haven't told you," she said quietly. "Something I thought didn't matter. But now..." Aldrich waited. "When I first came here," she went on, "I found a book hidden in the back wall of the scriptorium. Small, leather-bound. The ink had faded in places, but I could still make out the writing. It wasn't a prayer book. Not exactly. More like a journal. A night's record, I think. But strange." "What was strange about it?" he asked. She hesitated. "He wrote like someone trapped. Not by walls or chains, but by duty. He wrote that he was one of seven knights, chosen to stay behind when the others rode off to war. But he didn't name the war, or the Lord. Just said they were bound to stone by vow and silence to hold what should not wake. Aldrich's brow furrowed. Bound to stone, he didn't explain it. Only that their duty was older than the king, older than the language, and that each year, one of the 7 would vanish. Quietly, without a struggle, until only he remained. What happened to him? I don't know, she said. The last entry just ends mid-sentence, as if the ink ran out, or something stopped him. Aldrich felt the chill in his spine again. Do you still have it? I buried it, she said, in the garden, after the first time I saw a night disappear. He didn't press her. He just stood with her by the fire, listening to the faint crackle of wood and the distant rustle of the wind outside. The next morning, the fog was worse. The village didn't stir. No carts came. No bells rang. The outer walls were lost entirely to the mist. Tom said even the dogs had gone quiet. Sir Owen, normally the first to rise and walk the walls, had not come down from his quarters. When Aldrich went to check, he found a man's sword propped by the window, his armor stacked neatly in the corner. The bed was cold, empty, no blood, no signs of struggle. Just gone. Another night vanished. When he returned to the hall, Sir Brant didn't speak. He just stared at the fire. That evening, Aldrich sat alone in the scriptorium, poring through old letters and maps, anything that might offer a clue. Many were faded. Some were written in languages that hadn't been spoken in the region in centuries. But one small scroll caught his attention. A map, not of the region, but of the castle itself. Older than any version he'd seen before. There was a marking beneath the southern tower, a chamber with no door, no stair. Just a black circle drawn at the center of its base. The ink was smudged, but beside it were words in a tight, trembling hand. Here lies the first watch. Unbroken, unnamed. He rubbed at his eyes, suddenly exhausted. The lantern light flickered. Shadows played tricks in the corners. He thought of the well again, of the writing beneath the tapestry, of the voice he'd heard behind him that night, quiet, tired, still watching. He returned to the courtyard before midnight. The mist hung low, cold and wet. As he approached the well, he heard it again. A breath. Not his own. Soft. Near. He turned. No one there. He looked back toward the well. Something leaned just past the edge, half seen in the shadows. A figure. Cloaked. Then it stepped back and vanished into the darkness. He didn't chase it. Instead, he looked up toward the windows of the old chapel, now dark, and the tower above, where no lights had burned in hours. He thought of the names. Dannon, Marek, Owen, Benedict, all drawn, one by one, into silence. He thought of the journal Lena had buried. The knight who remained after 6 had gone. Aldrich returned to the chapel, not for prayer, to wait. He sat in the last pew, the air damp and cool around him. No one else came. No bell rang. The candles burned low. The stone beneath him felt different. Not cold, but awake. He closed his eyes. For a moment, it was peaceful. Then he heard it. Footsteps. Not loud. Not rushed. Just walking. One pair. Echoing down the corridor. Not coming from the door. From beneath. He opened his eyes. The sound stopped. He rose slowly. Moved toward the altar. There was no hatch. No trapdoor. But the stone behind the pulpit had strange seams, just barely visible in the lantern light. He pressed his hand to them. Nothing moved, but the air shifted. Behind him, the door creaked. He turned quickly, but the chapel was empty. Still, but not silent. He could hear breathing again. Low, careful, not far off. He stayed there, unmoving, listening. The sound came again, this time from behind the altar. Then it stopped. He waited. Nothing. But the air was wrong. It held the weight of something just out of reach. Watching. Always watching. Aldrich didn't sleep that night. He sat in the chapel until the candles burned out and the faint gray light of morning filtered through the stained glass. The breathing had stopped hours ago, or at least he thought it had. But the feeling of being watched hadn't faded. It never really left him now. By dawn, he returned to his quarters and washed the fog from his cloak. The water in the basin was colder than it should have been. It made his fingers ache. Still, it grounded him, gave him something solid to hold on to. That was all he wanted lately. Something solid. Something real. Outside, the castle was unnaturally quiet. Even the birds had gone. There were no hoofbeats, no blacksmith's hammer, no crack of kindling near the kitchen hearth. Just wind and mist and a muffled drip of watered-down stone. He found Tom standing near the north parapet, leaning on the wall, staring into nothing. "You see anything?" Aldrich asked. Tom shook his head. "Not today, but I feel it. Same as yesterday, like the skies pressing down." Aldrich joined him. They stood side by side, peering into the swirling fog. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," Tom said. "When I signed on, I thought it'd be an honor. Standing watch, wearing the crest, serving beside real knights. I thought it'd mean something." "It did," Aldrich said quietly. "Yeah," Tom said after a pause. "Maybe once." Later, Aldrich climbed the southern tower again, where Sir Owen's room still sat undisturbed. Nothing had been moved since he'd found it empty. Armor still neatly stacked, swords still leaning against the wall. He sat on the bed. It was the first time he'd really looked at the space. Owen had never invited anyone in. Not that there was much to invite them to. The walls were bare except for a small painted icon of a saint. The floor held no rugs, no books, no letters, just a single wooden stool by the window. Aldrich crossed the room, sat on the stool, and looked outside. Nothing but fog. But he thought he saw it again, something at the edge. A shape, a figure, the same one. Tall, still, waiting, and it was gone. No movement, no sound, just gone. He didn't bother telling anyone this time. He wasn't sure who'd believe him, or who was still willing to listen. At midday, Lena knocked softly on his door. "I dug it up," she said, holding the small leather-bound book wrapped in cloth. "I thought maybe you should see it for yourself." He nodded and stepped aside, letting her in. She placed it on the table and gently unwrapped the fabric. The leather was worn smooth, corners curled. A broken strap dangled from one side. He opened it carefully. The writing was cramped, tilted, hard to read in places. But there was a rhythm to it, tight, methodical, desperate in its own quiet way. "We do not sleep now. Not truly. Not since the third vanished. Silence is safer." They listened for breath, for thought, for fear. He flipped a few pages ahead. "I was told there were 7 of us. 7 who would hold this place when others failed. But no one told me what we were holding back." More lines followed, some barely legible, smudged with dirt or damp. "I heard them on the floor last night. Not voices, just footsteps, walking slowly, always just beneath, as if they were tracing the same path over and over." Aldrich looked up. "How old do you think this is?" Lena leaned against the wall. "Hard to say. The ink is old, but the style, it feels older. Maybe 2 centuries. Maybe more. Why was it hidden? Maybe someone didn't want it found," she said. "Or maybe he buried it himself." Aldrich turned another page. This one held only a single line, centered in the middle of the page. "If I vanish, let the stone remember me." He stared at the words for a long time. Outside, the wind picked up again. The old shutter on the hallway window creaked slowly back and forth, like it was being rocked by someone's hand. That evening, they gathered what remained of the knights. Brant, grim and worn. A few squires. The old cook who'd once fought in the king's wars and still carried himself like a soldier. Lena stood at the edge of the circle, hands clasped tight. "We need to know what's beneath us," Aldrich said. "Whatever's happening, it's not going to stop. We're not just watching anymore. We're being watched." No one disagreed. Brant finally spoke. "They're old tunnels," he said, "under the chapel. Dug long ago. Some collapsed, some sealed, but they're still there. Can we reach them?" Aldrich asked. "Maybe, if we find the right stone." They moved quietly, lighting only a few torches to avoid drawing attention. The castle didn't feel like it belonged to them anymore. It felt borrowed, as if at any moment something might return to claim it. In the chapel, the air felt colder. They pushed aside the pulpit and searched the seams in the stone. Brant's torchlight caught a crack, one that ran in a perfect square. A hidden panel. With effort, they pried it open. Beneath was a narrow staircase, winding down into dark. The air that rose from it was dry, old, and strangely still. They descended in silence. The walls closed around them. The steps curved slowly, endlessly, until the sound of the chapel above faded to nothing. At the bottom, The torchlight flickered against stone walls marked with the same spiral pattern Aldrich had seen in the storage chamber. The tunnel stretched ahead, low, uneven, silent. They followed it. The walls bore signs of old carvings, half erased by time. Strange figures. Eyes. Circles within circles. None of them familiar. Then, suddenly, the tunnel opened into a chamber. It was round, built of perfectly fitted stone. The ceiling arched overhead like a dome, and in the center stood a stone pillar carved with names. They were old, faint, but they were names, and one by one, Aldrich recognized them. Sir Dannon, Sir Marek, Sir Owen, Sir Benedict, and 7 empty spaces beneath them, uncarved, waiting. No one spoke for a long time. The torchlight danced across the carved pillar, making the names shimmer faintly in the dusty chamber. Aldrich stepped closer, careful not to disturb the stillness. He traced his fingers along the stone, over the deep-set letters. The names were carved by hand, slowly and with care, like someone wanted them to last forever. It wasn't the kind of work left behind in haste. Why would they put this here? Tom asked, voice hushed. Brant looked around the circular walls, then up toward the ceiling, where strange ridges crisscrossed in a spiraling pattern. Not from memory, Brant said finally. This feels like something older. A vow, maybe. Something binding. Aldrich glanced back at the pillar. The bottom row of names remained blank, 7 spaces left untouched. The same number of nights that remained in the castle when all of this began, or had remained. Now, there were fewer. Lena slowly circled the room, studying the carvings along the outer wall. Symbols repeated in patterns, an open eye, a closed hand, a broken spear. None of them matched any order or heraldry she'd ever studied. These aren't decorative, she said, brushing dust from one of the symbols. They're warnings, or instructions. For what? Tom asked. She didn't answer. Aldrich turned back toward the pillar. The ground around it was scuffed like someone or something had walked here not long ago. Maybe even circled the stone. The marks weren't deep, but they were recent. He knelt and touched one of the indentations with the back of his hand. The stone was warm. Barely, but undeniably. He stood and stepped away. Let's go back, Brant said. This place wasn't meant to be disturbed. No one argued. As they climbed the narrow stairs again, Aldrich glanced over his shoulder. Just once. The chamber sat in still silence, the torchlight fading until it left nothing but shadow and stone behind. Back in the chapel, the air felt thinner. The walls closer. I want to know who built this place, Aldrich said quietly. I want to know what they were trying to keep out, or in. Brant looked tired. Not angry, not frightened, just worn. We were never supposed to ask those questions, he said. Knights are trained to serve, to protect, not to understand. But that's what got us here, Lena said. Silence. Obedience. Looking the other way. The door behind them creaked softly. Just the wind, probably. But everyone turned to look. No one was there. That night, Aldrich couldn't sleep again. He tried. He lay on his back, stared at the ceiling, counted breaths. But the quiet kept pressing in. Eventually, he got up and walked. The halls were dark. A single torch burned near the main stairwell, casting long shadows up the walls. The night watch had grown thinner. There were supposed to be 4 on patrol. He passed only one. Young Alric, barely 17, too thin for his armor, pacing nervously with a short spear in hand. You seen anything? Aldrich asked him. The boy nodded. Heard whispers, but nothing clear. Just movement. Aldrich nodded and moved on. He passed the old armory, now empty. The smith had stopped coming days ago. Most of the squires stayed inside during the dark hours now, speaking little, if at all. Fear was a quiet thing, spreading between them like cold water seeping under a door. As he walked past the lower west hall, Aldrich stopped. One of the doors was open. It led to a room that had been locked for years, the old strategy chamber, where past lords had met with their war councils. No one used it anymore. The table was still inside, a great circle of black oak with maps drawn into its surface. He stepped in. The room smelled of dust and iron. A candle flickered near the back wall, lit, though he hadn't lit it, and no one had been assigned this post. He approached the table. Something had been placed at its center. A helm. It was old, very old, the kind worn long before Aldrich's time. The metal was dulled, almost greenish with age. Scratches marked its surface like clawed hands had once tried to pry it open. He reached out, hesitated, then gently picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, and colder. Inside, carved faintly into the metal lining, was a name. Sir Emmerich. A name not on the pillar below. Aldrich stared at it, heart slowly beating louder in his chest. There had been others. More than 7. Maybe many more. The pillar was only one chapter. He placed the helm back down carefully. Then he saw the note. Just a scrap of paper, folded in half and tucked beneath the edge of the helm. He unfolded it. The handwriting was sharp, angular, written in ink that had only just begun to fade. If you find this, it means I've failed. But maybe you won't. Don't let them finish what they started. Don't let them fill the pillar. There was no name, no signature, just those words, left behind in a room no one had entered in years. He took the note and walked out slowly, heart still pounding, trying to keep his steps quiet. The castle felt emptier now than ever. Even the air seemed thinner, less certain of its place in the walls. He found Lena awake in the scriptorium, scribbling notes by candlelight. I think there were more than 7, he told her, handing her the folded paper. She read it, then looked up. I think you're right. There's a deeper pattern here, something older than even the chapel stone. I found references to a vigil order that predates the founding of this region. No name, just descriptions. Knights who held long watches, far from court and politics. She pulled a thin book from the pile beside her. This one mentions them guarding the silence between bells. I thought it was a metaphor. Maybe it's not, he said. Lena leaned forward. You remember what the old steward told you? That some things weren't meant to be kept, only watched. Aldrich nodded slowly. Well, she said, what if this castle isn't just a stronghold? What if it's a lock? A prison? And with a key? He asked. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Outside, the wind picked up again, hard enough to rattle the wooden shutters on the far wall. A thud echoed from somewhere above. Something falling, or something landing. Neither of them moved. They sat in silence, waiting, listening, and somewhere, far below, the stone pillar waited too, still uncarved, still watching. Aldrich couldn't shake the feeling that the castle itself was breathing, its stone walls alive with whispers and shadows that twisted just beyond sight. The more he learned, the less certain he became about what he was really guarding. The old stories, the quiet warnings from Lena's books, and the strange carvings beneath the chapel, they all pointed to something far older than the knights themselves. Something waiting. The idea settled heavy in his mind like the weight of his armor after a long day on watch. This was no ordinary fortress, and they were no ordinary soldiers. They weren't just protecting a piece of land or a lord's pride. They were guardians of something unseen, something that should never be forgotten or disturbed. Lena spent hours poring over the manuscripts she had uncovered, deciphering faded ink and brittle pages. She worked quietly, her brow furrowed, but Aldrich could see the unease growing in her eyes. There's a pattern, she said one afternoon, tapping a fragile page. These knights weren't just protectors. They were a line, a chain meant to hold something back. A chain? Aldrich asked, feeling the chill of the castle's draft as it slipped through the cracks. Yes, Lena replied, her voice low. The order was formed to keep a boundary sealed between our world and something else. The text isn't clear what exactly, but the warnings are unmistakable. Brant, who had listened from the corner, shook his head. Superstition, old wives' tales, he muttered, though his eyes betrayed a shadow of doubt. Tom, usually silent and steady, finally spoke up. I don't care what it is, but whatever's beneath us, it's stirring, and it's not waiting quietly anymore. The castle's atmosphere shifted. The quiet became heavier, thicker, like a storm held in the stillness. Strange sounds crept through the halls, footsteps where no one walked, faint echoes that did not belong to any living man. Lanterns flickered even when the air was still. The knights, once proud and confident, now moved with cautious glances over their shoulders, their laughter replaced by nervous silence. One evening, Aldrich found himself alone in the courtyard. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the cold wind tangled through the bare branches of the ancient trees. He pulled his cloak tighter and stared up at the battlements, imagining the countless eyes that had watched from above over centuries. He thought about the empty spaces on the stone pillar, waiting to be filled. How many had vanished before? How many more would? A sudden noise caught his attention, a soft rustling near the edge of the garden. He moved silently toward it, sword drawn. The fog curled like a living thing around his feet. As he neared, he saw a figure slip behind a stone statue. Aldrich called out, but the figure vanished into the mist. Returning inside, he told Lena and Brand about the glimpse of something moving in the shadows. Lena frowned. You're not the only one feeling watched. Brant nodded grimly. It's not just fear anymore. It's a warning. At the same time, rumors began spreading among the squires and servants. Some spoke of a shadowy figure wandering the corridors at night, others of strange lights flickering beneath the chapel floor. Whispers of curses and ancient promises circulated quietly, though no one dared speak openly. Amid this growing tension, a new subplot unfolded quietly, one that threatened to unravel the fragile order they clung to. Among the knights, cracks began to show. Loyalty wavered. Old grievances surfaced. Some questioned whether they should remain bound to a duty that offered no glory or rest, only fear and uncertainty. Tom, once eager and hopeful, grew restless. Why do we stay? He asked Aldrich one night by the fire. For what? A promise we don't understand? A secret we can't see? I don't know if I want to vanish like the others. Aldrich didn't answer. He didn't have the words. Meanwhile, Lena uncovered more troubling signs in her research. The texts hinted that the boundary the knights were guarding was weakening. The seals, ancient and powerful, were failing, and the watchers who had stood before them were falling, their names etched in stone as a somber testament. One passage struck her deeply. When the last name is carved, the silence will break and the shadows will rise. The phrase echoed in her mind, a quiet drumbeat of impending doom. The castle's nights grew colder still. Doors would sometimes lock themselves or open with no one near. Footsteps echoed in empty halls. And in the chapel bell, long silent, would toll once, faint and mournful, before falling into silence again. Aldrich found himself drawn back to the stone pillar beneath the chapel. Each visit deepened his unease. He could almost feel the weight of those names pressing down, a ledger of forgotten promises and sacrifices. One evening, Brand confided in Aldrich a story passed down through generations, about a knight who had once tried to flee his duty. That knight was said to have vanished without a trace, his name erased from the stone as if he'd never existed at all. Running doesn't work, Brant said. The castle never lets you go. Not truly. This only deepened the mystery and the fear. If the castle held such power, what became of those who tried to escape? Were they lost? Taken? Or worse? Amid the tension, small acts of kindness and courage flickered like lanterns in the dark. Lena's quiet determination to understand the past. Tom's growing resolve, despite his fear. Aldrich's own commitment to protect those who still believed. But beneath it all, the shadow of what lurked remained. Unseen but felt. Waiting. The castle story was far from over. And the next chapter, Aldrich knew, was coming soon. Aldrich found it harder to sleep each night. The castle no longer felt like a home or a refuge, but a cage made of stone and silence. Every creak of wood, every whisper of wind through the battlements, seemed to carry a message he couldn't quite understand. It was as if the walls themselves were alive, watching, waiting. He began to notice the smallest details, the way shadows pooled in corners where light should have reached, how the air grew colder near certain doors, how the torches flickered when no breath of wind stirred. The deeper he looked, the more he saw that the castle held secrets not meant for the living. Lena had spent the last few days almost entirely in the library, surrounded by stacks of old tomes and brittle scrolls. Her eyes were tired, but her determination hadn't faltered. One afternoon, as Aldrich came to bring her fresh water, she looked up with a grim expression. "There's more than one way the order might have been broken," she said quietly. "It's not just a weakening seal or a fading promise. There could be something inside the castle, something that doesn't want to be contained." Aldrich sat beside her, feeling the weight of her words settle in the air between them. "You mean a force?" "Not just a force," Lena whispered. "An ancient presence. Something old enough to have shaped the land itself." That night, the castle seemed to close in around him. He made his way to the chapel, drawn once again to the pillar with its carved names. The empty spaces were like wounds in the stone, reminders of knights who had disappeared, forgotten by all but the cold stone and the whispers of the wind. As he stood there, a faint sound caught his attention. A soft, low hum, barely audible but steady, coming from beneath the chapel floor. He knelt down, pressing his ear to the cold stone. The sound seemed to pulse, like a heartbeat buried deep in the earth. His heart raced. What was it? Suddenly, the chapel bell tolled again, soft, mournful, and just as unexpectedly as before. The sound echoed through the halls, leaving a silence heavier than before. Aldrich rose slowly, his breath shallow. He made his way to the stairwell leading down to the crypts beneath the chapel. The old stone steps were worn and slippery, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom, the passage opened into a narrow corridor lined with ancient iron sconces. The faint hum was louder here, vibrating through the very walls. He walked forward, the torchlight flickering as if struggling against some unseen force. Near the end of the corridor, he paused before a heavy wooden door bound with iron. The door was old, scarred by time and use, but it was locked tight. Yet, as Aldrich's hand touched the rough wood, the lock clicked open with a sound that echoed like a sigh. Inside, the chamber was dark and cold, filled with shadows that seemed to move at the edge of his vision. The walls were lined with strange carvings, symbols that twisted and spiraled in patterns unlike anything Aldrich had seen before. In the center of the room lay an altar of black stone, worn smooth. Upon it rested a book bound in cracked leather, its pages yellowed and brittle. Aldrich approached slowly, every step heavy with unease. He reached out and opened the book, careful not to damage the fragile pages. The writing inside was in an ancient script, but some of it was clear enough, a record of the Order's origins, their purpose, and the terrible cost of their duty. The knights weren't just protectors. They were prisoners, bound by oath and magic to hold back something terrible, a darkness that had once threatened to swallow the world whole. Aldrich's fingers trembled as he read. The book spoke of sacrifices made, of knights who vanished without a trace, their names erased from history as if they had never existed. And then a warning, written in bold ink that seemed to bleed across the page. Should the last name be carved, the darkness will rise. A cold chill ran through Aldrich's bones. He closed the book quickly and looked around the chamber, feeling eyes upon him. But there was no one. Outside, a faint scratching echoed against the stone walls. Aldrich's breath caught. He wasn't alone. He hurried back up the stairs, the shadows seeming to press closer with every step. Reaching the chapel, he found Lena waiting, her face pale but determined. "We have to tell the others," Aldrich said. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about what happens if the order fails." Lena nodded. "We need to find out who wrote that note beneath the helm, and why no one ever mentioned this part of the story." Together, they gathered Brant and Tom. Aldrich shared what he had found, watching as the men's expressions darkened. Brant clenched his fists. "We've been blind, following rules without knowing the price." Tom looked away. "What if we can't stop it? What if it's already too late?" The castle seemed to listen in silence, the shadows gathering around them like a living thing. As they planned their next move, a soft creak echoed through the chapel doors. Aldrich's hand went to his sword, heart pounding. The door opened slowly, revealing a figure cloaked in dark fabric, face hidden. "You seek the truth," the figure said, voice low and calm. "But some truths are more dangerous than the darkness you fear." Aldrich stepped forward. "Who are you?" The figure smiled faintly, a shadow beneath the hood. "A keeper, a watcher. I've been waiting for one of you to understand." Before Aldrich could ask more, the figures slipped away into the night, leaving more questions than answers. The castle held its secrets tight, and the night grew deeper still. The figures' words echoed in Aldrich's mind long after the shadow had vanished into the darkness of the chapel. A keeper, a watcher, someone or something that had been waiting for them to discover the truth. But what truth? And why reveal it now, when the weight of the unknown already pressed so heavily on their shoulders? The knights gathered close, their faces pale in the flickering firelight. None of them spoke at first, each wrestling with the unseen fear that had settled between them. Aldrich finally broke the silence, his voice quiet but steady. "We can't ignore what's happening. The signs, the carvings, the disappearances, they all point to something beyond our understanding. We need to prepare." Brant shook his head. "Prepare? Against what? We've fought battles with swords and shields. How do we fight against shadows and whispers?" Lena, who had been silent for a moment, finally spoke up. "We may not be able to fight with weapons alone. This order was built on more than just steel. There's knowledge, rituals, perhaps even magic we've forgotten." Aldrich nodded, feeling a faint spark of hope. "Then we start there. We learn. We look for answers in the history we've ignored." That night, the castle seemed to hold its breath. The usual sounds, the clatter of armor, the murmur of voices, were absent, replaced by an eerie silence that wrapped around the stones like a thick fog. Aldrich lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his chamber. Memories of past nights flickered in his mind, their sacrifices, their courage, their fears. He thought of the empty spaces on the pillar, of the names lost to time, and wondered what had become of them. Were they trapped somewhere beneath the castle? Or had they been claimed by whatever darkness the order was meant to hold back? Outside his window, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying a faint, mournful sound. It was the chapel bell again, tolling softly in the dead of night. The next morning, Lena led Aldrich and the others to the library, where she had uncovered a hidden compartment behind a row of dusty books. Inside lay a small, leather-bound journal, its pages filled with notes and sketches from a night long gone. The journal told of strange dreams, restless nights, and a growing sense of dread. The knight had written of an unseen force stirring beneath the castle, of shadows moving in the corners of his vision. Most chilling were the final entries, which spoke of a secret chamber deep below, sealed by powerful magic and guarded by ancient rites. "This might be the key," Lena said, her fingers tracing the faded ink. "If we can find this chamber, we might understand what we're truly facing." Their search began with the chapel, the oldest part of the castle. They moved cautiously through narrow passageways and forgotten corridors, the air thick with dust and the scent of ancient stone. As they descended into the crypts beneath the chapel, the temperature dropped sharply. Their footsteps echoed, swallowed quickly by the darkness. The walls here were covered in carvings, symbols, and warnings etched by hands long dead. Aldrich's torchlight flickered, casting dancing shadows that seemed to twist and writhe. He fought the urge to look away, to deny the feeling that something was watching them. At last, they found it, a heavy stone door covered in runes that glowed faintly in the torchlight. The air around it felt alive, humming with power. Lena carefully traced the symbols with her fingers. "This is a seal," she whispered, "a barrier to keep something contained." Brant stepped forward, testing the door's strength. "It's locked tight, and it feels wrong, like opening it could bring danger." Tom looked at Aldrich, eyes wide. "What if it's already too late?" Aldrich swallowed hard. "We have to know. We can't stay blind any longer." With a deep breath, Aldrich pushed against the door. It resisted, then slowly creaked open, revealing a narrow stairwell spiraling down into darkness. They hesitated for only a moment before descending, each step taking them further from the world above and deeper into the unknown. The stairwell opened into a vast chamber, the walls lined with ancient relics and faded tapestries. In the center stood a stone altar covered in dust and spiderwebs. Symbols similar to those on the door were carved into the floor, forming a circle around the altar. As Aldrich approached, he felt a strange pull, a force that tugged at his very soul. The air here was thick and heavy, charged with an energy that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. Lena knelt beside the altar, examining the carvings. "This is a place of power," she said softly. "A place where the boundary between worlds is thin." Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the chamber, shaking the stone beneath their feet. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the air grew colder still. Aldrich drew his sword, eyes scanning the darkness. The shadows seemed to pulse and shift, forming shapes that flickered just beyond clarity. From the depths of the chamber, a whisper rose, a voice ancient and filled with sorrow. "Remember the promise," it said, barely audible. "Guard the seal. Honor the chain." The knights stood frozen, caught between fear and duty. Lena's voice trembled. The order was more than just knights. They were guardians of a secret, a price paid in silence and sacrifice. Brant gritted his teeth. And now that price is due again. The chamber seemed to close in around them, the weight of centuries pressing down. Aldrich looked at his companions, their faces pale but resolute. They had uncovered the truth, but it was only the beginning. Outside, the wind howled, carrying the distant tolling of the chapel bell. The darkness was waiting, and the chain was beginning to break. The air in the chamber thickened as the last echoes of the whisper faded, leaving a heavy silence that pressed against their lungs. Aldrich sheathed his sword slowly, the weight of what they had just heard sinking in deeper than any blade ever could. "Guard the seal. Honor the chain." The words weren't just warnings. They were a command passed down through generations, binding knights to a fate they barely understood. Lena stood, brushing dust from her hands. "We're the chain now," she said quietly. "The last link holding back whatever this is." Brant's jaw clenched. "If that's true, then what happens when the chain breaks? What do we face?" Tom's voice was barely more than a whisper. "Something worse than death." They turned their eyes to the dark corners of the chamber, as if expecting the shadows themselves to answer. But nothing moved. For now, as they climbed back up the spiral stairs, the cold seemed to cling tighter to their bones, a reminder that whatever waited below wasn't finished yet. The castle's heavy stones felt alive with a watchful hunger, and every step forward was a step deeper into a mystery that refused to stay buried. Back in the great hall, the others waited. Aldrich told them everything. The journal, the sealed chamber, the whisper, and the growing threat lurking beneath their feet. The room filled with uneasy silence. Faces that once carried pride now showed worry, and some, like Brant, anger. "We've been blind," Brant said, pacing like a caged wolf. "Blind and easy to forget what this castle really is." Aldrich met his gaze. "But now we know, and we have to decide what to do." That night, the castle seemed to breathe with restless energy. Lanterns flickered, shadows twisted unnaturally, and the chapel bell tolled again, softly at first, then louder, more urgent. It was a sound that echoed in their hearts, a call to a duty far heavier than armor or sword. Aldrich couldn't sleep. He walked the corridors, each step echoing in the empty halls. The names on the stone pillar under the chapel haunted him. Each was a story lost to time, a knight who had vanished, erased by the darkness they swore to contain. He paused at the pillar, fingers tracing the empty spaces. The silence felt alive, almost waiting for something to fill the gaps. Lena joined him quietly. "The chain is more fragile than we thought," she said. "The names aren't just records. They're a warning." Aldrich nodded. "And if the last name is carved?" "The darkness rises," Lena finished. They both looked up, knowing the truth was a shadow hanging over them all. The next days brought more unease. Strange noises echoed through the castle. Footsteps when no one was there, whispers in forgotten rooms, and cold spots that chilled to the bone. The nights grew more restless. Tom avoided eye contact and spent hours near the armory, sharpening weapons as if the act alone could stave off what was coming. Brant took a different approach. He pushed harder, questioning old traditions, challenging the need for secrecy. We're not ghosts, he argued. We can face this with strength and truth. But Lena warned, strength alone won't hold back what's beneath. We need knowledge, rituals, and unity. Their differences sparked tension, splitting the knights in subtle ways. Loyalties wavered, and suspicion began to creep like a slow poison. One evening, Aldrich found Tom sitting alone in the courtyard, staring up at the dark sky. The stars were hidden behind thick clouds, and the wind carried the scent of rain. "You don't believe we can stop it," Aldrich said softly, sitting beside him. Tom shook his head. "I don't know what to believe anymore, but I feel it coming, like a storm that can't be turned away." Aldrich placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we prepare, together." But even as they made plans, the castle's secrets deepened. Lena discovered a hidden passage behind a tapestry in the library, a narrow corridor leading to a forgotten part of the fortress. It was old, darker than the rest, and lined with symbols that made her skin crawl. "We should explore it," she said. "There might be answers we haven't found yet." Aldrich agreed, and the next day, they gathered a small group to follow the passage. The air grew colder and heavier with every step. The walls seemed to close in, and the light from their torches flickered uncertainly. At the end of the passage, they found a small chamber carved directly into the bedrock. In the center stood a stone basin filled with dark water that reflected the flickering torchlight in unsettling ways. Lena stepped closer, peering into the depths. "This is a sacred place," she whispered. "A place where knights once made promises, and perhaps where the chain was forged." A sudden chill swept through the room. The water rippled, though the air was still. Aldrich felt a presence, a weight pressing on his chest, as if the chamber itself was alive and watching. Brant looked uneasy. "We're not supposed to be here." Before they could react further, a distant sound echoed through the stone, a slow, dragging noise like something being pulled across the floor far below. The group exchanged tense glances. The castle was speaking again, reminding them that their time was running out. As they left the chamber, the corridors seemed darker, the shadows longer. The walls whispered secrets Aldrich wasn't sure he wanted to hear. Back in the great hall, they shared what they had found. The knights listened, some with growing fear, others with defiant resolve. "This isn't just a castle," Lena said. "It's a prison, for something old and powerful, and we are its guards." The realization settled heavily on everyone. Their roles were not about honor or glory, but about survival, keeping a darkness contained that could unravel everything if it broke free. That night, as the chapel bell tolled once more, Aldrich stood at the window of his chamber, staring out into the storm that was gathering on the horizon. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it a promise of change, of reckoning. The chain was fraying. The darkness was stirring, and the next name was waiting to be carved. The storm broke just after midnight, rain lashing the castle walls like fists trying to force their way inside. The wind roared through the battlements, carrying a wild, restless energy that seemed to echo the fear tightening in the knights' chests. Aldrich stood near the heavy wooden door of the great hall, listening to the sounds outside, the clash of thunder, the pounding rain, and beneath it all a low, unsettling hum that vibrated through the stone beneath their feet. The air inside the castle felt charged, thick with anticipation, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Every shadow seemed to twitch and shift just beyond the edges of their vision. Lanterns flickered weakly, their flames struggling against the gusts sneaking through cracks and arrow slits. Lena was at his side, her face pale but determined. "It's coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever we're guarding, it's waking." Aldrich nodded. "We've known this moment would come. The chain was never meant to last forever, but I hoped it would hold a little longer." Behind them, the other knights gathered, faces drawn tight with worry. Brant paced restlessly, fingers twitching near the hilt of his sword. Tom stood silent, eyes fixed on the darkened windows, as if expecting the shadows themselves to step inside. The chapel bell tolled again, slow and mournful. The sound seemed to seep into their bones, a reminder that time was running out. Suddenly, the castle trembled, a low rumble that shook dust from the rafters and sent a chill down their spines. The stone floor cracked beneath their feet, tiny fissures spreading like veins. A distant crash echoed through the halls, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy chains dragging along stone. Aldrich's heart pounded. "The seal," he said, voice tight. "It's failing." Lena grabbed his arm. "We need to act. Now." They hurried to the chapel, moving through corridors that seemed narrower, darker, as if the darkness was closing in around them. The whispers they'd heard before returned, faint and eerie, like voices carried on the wind, calling out in a language that felt ancient and sorrowful. In the chapel, the pillars stood as silent and cold as ever, but the empty spaces felt heavier, as if waiting to be filled. At the base of the altar, the runes glowed faintly, an ominous light pulsing in time with the trembling walls. Brant stepped forward, voice firm. "We can't just stand here. The old rituals, there's one we must try. The one that binds the chain." Lena pulled a worn leather book from her pack. The pages yellowed with age. "It's risky," she warned. "The ritual calls for a sacrifice, a willing offering to strengthen the seal." Aldrich swallowed, the weight of responsibility pressing down hard. "Then it's up to us. We've known the cost from the start." Tom's eyes flashed with resolve. "I'll do it." "No," Aldrich said quickly. "This isn't just one person's burden. We do it together." Outside, the storm raged louder, the castle trembling under its assault. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the faces of the knights, some resolute, some terrified, all aware that their lives would never be the same. Lena began the ritual, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her. The others joined in, reciting the ancient words passed down through the order. The air thickened, charged with a power both beautiful and terrible. The runes flared bright, the glow spreading from the altar through the chapel, pushing back the shadows that crept along the walls. But then, a sudden, sharp crack split the air. The stone floor beneath them shattered, a jagged fracture ripping open to reveal a yawning abyss. From its depths rose a darkness, so deep it seemed to swallow the light whole, a living shadow that twisted and writhed with terrible hunger. The knights froze, hearts pounding. The chain was breaking. Brant drew his sword, but even steel seemed powerless against the abyss. The darkness surged forward, reaching for them with tendrils of shadow that chilled to the bone. Aldrich stepped forward, voice ringing out over the chaos. "Hold the line. We are the chain." The battle between light and shadow had begun, and the fate of the order of the castle hung in the balance. The darkness spilled into the chapel like a living thing, thick and suffocating, curling around the pillars and creeping across the floor like smoke. Aldrich could feel it pressing against his skin, cold and hungry. The air seemed to grow heavier with every breath, and the glow of the runes flickered, struggling to hold their light against the encroaching void. Brant's sword caught a flash of lightning as he swung at the shadowy tendrils reaching for him. The blade sliced through nothing but cold air, the darkness slipping through his grip like smoke through fingers. "This isn't a fight we can win with swords," he shouted, stepping back. Lena's voice cut through the chaos, steady and clear despite the fear in her eyes. "Keep the circle. Keep the light alive." The knights linked hands, forming a ring around the altar where the ancient runes glowed faintly beneath their feet. They chanted together, the old language rolling off their tongues in a rhythm that resonated with the very stones of the chapel. The light pulsed in time with their words, pushing against the shadows inch by inch. But the darkness was relentless. It writhed and twisted, shifting into shapes that seemed almost human, faces etched with sorrow, hands reaching out in silent pleas. Aldrich felt his resolve waver for a moment, caught between fear and pity. Were these the lost knights? Prisoners trapped between worlds, begging for release or revenge. A sudden cry shattered the chant. Tom fell to his knees, clutching his head as if the shadows had burrowed inside his mind. "No!" The whispers, he gasped, eyes wild. "They're calling me." Lena rushed to his side, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Fight it. Don't listen." But Tom's body went rigid, and with a guttural scream, he lunged toward the darkness, breaking the circle. The light faltered, and the shadows surged forward, slipping through the gap he'd opened. Aldrich acted without thinking, grabbing Tom and pulling him back, dragging him into the circle again. "Hold on. We need you." The struggle was brutal, every second feeling like a lifetime. The knights fought to restore the circle, their voices rising louder, more desperate. The runes flared brighter, burning away the edges of the darkness, but the center remained a swirling void, alive and hungry. Suddenly, the altar cracked, sending shards of stone flying. From the fissure rose a figure cloaked in shadow, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It moved with a terrifying grace, the air around it pulsing with power. Aldrich raised his sword, heart pounding. "Who are you?" The figure's voice was a whisper and a roar all at once. "I am the Forgotten, the debt unpaid, the chain broken." The knights tightened their circle, but the shadows around the figure seemed to absorb their light. Lena's voice faltered as she struggled to maintain the ritual, sweat streaming down her face. "We cannot let it break free," she cried. "If it escapes, it will consume everything." The shadow figure stepped closer, the darkness swirling like a storm around it. "You were chosen to guard, to bind, to suffer. But the chain is old, and the cost is high." Aldrich swallowed hard. "Then what do you want from us?" The figure's eyes bore into his soul. "Release, redemption, or destruction." Brant growled, stepping forward with his sword raised. "We will not be your slaves. We fight for this castle, for the order." The shadow laughed, a sound like the cracking of ice. "Then you fight against the inevitable." With a wave of its hand, tendrils of darkness lashed out. The knights dodged and countered, but the figure was fast, moving like smoke and shadow, impossible to pin down. Lena's chanting grew frantic, the runes beneath their feet pulsing wildly. The light pushed back, carving a shrinking sanctuary in the chapel's center. Aldrich felt exhaustion claw at him, every muscle screaming, but he refused to give in. The fate of everything they'd sworn to protect rested on this moment. The shadow figure's voice cut through the noise once more. "Your ancestors failed. Their names are carved in stone as warnings, not honors. Will you be any different?" The question hung heavy in the air. Aldrich glanced at his companions. Brant's grim determination, Lena's fierce resolve despite the fear, Tom's trembling but unwavering gaze. They were the last line, the last link in the chain. With a roar, Aldrich lifted his sword high, rallying the knights. "For the order, for the chain, we hold." The chapel erupted in light and shadow, a battle of wills that would decide the fate of all within and beyond. The ground trembled, the air thick with power, and the names on the stone pillar seemed to glow faintly, as if watching, waiting. The chain was breaking. The darkness was rising, and the story was far from over. The light from the runes pulsed fiercely, pushing back the shadows inch by inch. But just as Aldrich felt a glimmer of hope, the ground beneath them shifted violently. A deep rumble echoed through the chapel, shaking the ancient stones as if the castle itself was awakening in pain. Dust fell from the vaulted ceiling, and cracks spiderwebbed across the altar, threatening to collapse. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing scream cut through the air, an agonized sound that wasn't entirely human. It came from the far end of the chapel, where the shadow figure now recoiled, its glowing eyes narrowing in surprise. The knights turned toward the source, breath caught in their throats. From the darkness emerged a figure cloaked in ragged, weathered armor, face obscured by a dented helmet. At first, Aldrich thought it was one of their own lost knights returned, but as the figure stepped into the flickering torchlight, something unnatural about its presence made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "Ooh, what is that?" Brant whispered, gripping his sword tighter. The stranger lifted a gauntlet hand, and the shadows recoiled as if afraid. His voice was rough, layered with centuries of pain. "I'm a keeper, the one left behind when the chain was forged." Lena's eyes widened. "Keeper? We've only heard legends. a guardian cursed to watch over the darkness, bound by ancient magic. The shadow figure snarled, stepping forward again, but this new arrival held up a hand. "No," he said firmly, "not bound by the chain, but by choice, to ensure the darkness never escapes." Aldrich's mind raced. If this keeper had been watching all along, why hadn't he intervened sooner? What was his true purpose? The keeper turned to the knights. "The chain weakens because the old magic is failing. The sacrifice you offer, while noble, is not enough. There is a price yet unpaid, and it lies within this castle's walls." The chamber grew colder, the shadows creeping closer despite the keeper's presence. "One among you carries the blood of the original chain-bearers," the keeper continued. "Only their blood can renew the seal. Without it, the darkness will consume everything." Whispers rippled through the nights. Aldrich looked around, heart pounding. "Who?" he demanded. "Who among us?" Before an answer could come, the shadow figure lunged, claws slicing through the air. The knights scrambled to defend themselves, the battle erupting anew with even greater fury. The keeper moved with surprising speed, blocking the attacks and countering with a power that seemed to push back the darkness. Amidst the chaos, Aldrich caught a flicker of movement, Tom faltering, eyes glazed, stepping closer to the shadows as if drawn by an unseen force. "Tom!" Aldrich shouted, but the younger knight didn't respond. The keeper's voice rang out above the clash. "The bloodline awakens. He is the key." Lena's face paled. "Tom is the last of their line." Aldrich's heart sank. The conflict wasn't just about swords or spells. It was about blood, sacrifice, and betrayal hidden deep in their history. The chapel trembled again, the runes flickering wildly as the darkness surged. The battle had escalated beyond anything they had imagined, and now the fate of their souls and the castle rested on the fragile hope that they could unlock secrets buried for centuries before it was too late. The chain was fraying faster than ever, and the darkness was hungry for the final link. The chaos in the chapel swirled around Aldrich like a violent storm, each moment heavier than the last. Tom stood frozen near the edge of the circle, his eyes vacant, as if something inside him had snapped free from the reality the others shared. The shadows whispered around him, threading tendrils like silk, tugging at his very soul. Aldrich could see the weight of an ancient burden pressing down on the young knight, as if he carried the ghosts of a forgotten past. "Tom!" Aldrich shouted, stepping forward despite the darkness clawing at his boots. "You're stronger than this. Fight it." But Tom's lips moved soundlessly, reciting words in that same eerie language that had haunted their rituals, the language of the old magic tied to the chain. His hands trembled, and a faint glow flickered in his palm, a pale, sickly light unlike the runes beneath their feet. Lena's eyes widened in shock. He's awakening something inside him, something that shouldn't be disturbed. The keeper stepped forward, his weathered face shadowed beneath the battered helmet, voice low and steady despite the chaos. "He carries the blood of the original chain-bearers. The power within him is the last hope and the greatest danger." Aldrich swallowed hard. "Then how do we protect him? How do we keep the darkness from taking him completely?" The keeper's gaze was grim. "We don't. Not completely. The bloodline is a double-edged sword. Tom must decide. Will he bind the chain anew or break it forever?" Brant snarled, stepping between Tom and the creeping shadows. "No one breaks this chain, not while I stand." But even Brant's fierce loyalty couldn't shield Tom from the pull. The glow in Tom's hand grew stronger, a sickly green that stained the air with unease. The shadows around him stirred, swirling like a storm about to break. Aldrich clenched his sword tighter, realizing the battle was no longer just against an outside force. It was inside them, in the very blood that ran through Tom's veins. Suddenly, the chapel door burst open, slammed against the stone wall by the wind, and through the swirling rain came a figure cloaked in tattered robes. Their face was hidden beneath a hood, but the presence was unmistakable. Another guardian of the ancient order, thought long lost to the darkness. "Stop!" The newcomer's voice rang out, powerful and urgent. You don't understand what you're risking. Lena stepped forward, eyes narrowing. And who are you to interfere? We are fighting for the survival of this castle. The figure pulled back the hood, revealing a face marked with deep lines of sorrow and fierce determination. A woman, older than any of them, with eyes like burning embers. I am Alara, she said simply, the last keeper before him. I have come to warn you. The darkness you fight is only a symptom of a deeper curse. The chain is not just a binding, it is a prison, and Tom is its key. Gasps echoed through the room. Aldrich's mind raced. Another keeper, more knowledge, more secrets buried beneath centuries of silence. Alara's voice softened, but held weight. If Tom breaks the chain, the darkness will be unleashed. But if he binds it, he will become part of the prison, forever trapped. Tom looked up, confusion and fear battling in his eyes. So, I'm supposed to sacrifice myself? To be locked away for the rest of my days? Alara nodded slowly. That is the price. The chain requires a guardian, bound in blood and spirit, to hold back the darkness. The shadow figure snarled, slamming a fist into the stone floor. Fools! Your sacrifice only delays the inevitable. The darkness will consume all, and your chains will shatter. Brant raised his sword again, voice fierce. Then we'll fight until our last breath. No darkness claims us without a battle. Lena moved to Tom's side, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You don't have to decide alone. We stand with you. Aldrich swallowed the lump in his throat. The weight of their legacy was crushing. They were not just knights wielding swords. They were the last line against an ancient evil, trapped in a cycle of sacrifice and suffering. Outside, the storm howled louder, lightning flashing through the narrow windows. The castle seemed to shudder beneath the growing pressure of the dark forces pressing in. A sudden crash echoed from below. The dungeons, long abandoned and sealed, had been broken open. From the depths, a low growl rolled upward, shaking the very foundation. Alara's eyes darkened. It's begun. The darkness stirs beneath the castle. We have little time. The knights exchanged grim looks. They were running out of options and time. Aldrich stepped forward, voice steady despite the fear clawing at his heart. Then we make our stand here, together, for the chain, for the castle, for each other. The circle reformed, hands joined, voices rising in desperate chant as the runes blazed brighter. The storm outside raged, the battle inside the chapel reaching a fever pitch. And in the shadows, something ancient and terrible watched, waiting for the final move. The darkness was not just breaking free, it was ready to claim everything. The air inside the chapel grew thick with tension, each breath feeling heavier than the last. The glow from the runes beneath their feet cast flickering shadows that danced wildly across the ancient walls, as if the very stones were alive and reacting to the battle waging within. Aldrich's heart pounded in his chest, a steady drumbeat against the mounting fear that threatened to overwhelm him. Tom stood at the center of the circle, the sickly green light pulsing from his palm like a living thing. His eyes darted between his comrades, haunted and unsure, as if the weight of the centuries-old burden pressed down on him with crushing force. I don't know if I can do this, he whispered, voice barely audible over the storm that battered the castle outside. What if I fail? What if I become the very thing I'm trying to stop? Lena's grip tightened on his shoulder. You're not alone, Tom. We're here. We'll face this together. But even as she spoke, the shadows at the edge of the circle writhed and stretched, pressing closer with an almost hungry anticipation. The air seemed to hum with dark energy, the boundary between light and shadow growing thinner by the second. Alara stepped forward, her eyes burning with a fierce light that belied her weary face. The chain is not just a prison. It is a promise, an oath taken by those who came before you. Tom, your ancestors chose sacrifice to protect the innocent. The choice you face is the same. Aldrich watched as Tom's hand clenched into a fist, the green light flickering wildly. The chapel trembled beneath their feet, dust raining down from the vaulted ceiling like a slow, ominous snowfall. Suddenly, The stone floor cracked sharply beneath the altar, a fissure opening wide enough to reveal a swirling abyss of darkness beneath. From that void, a cold wind blew upward, carrying whispers that crawled into their ears like ice. Voices of the forgotten, the betrayed, the damned. The shadow figure, once held at bay, surged forward, feeding on the growing fear and uncertainty. You cling to old oaths and empty promises. It hissed, voice like the rustling of dead leaves. The chain will fail. Your bloodline will break. And I will be free. Brant stepped in front of the others, sword raised, his voice a growl. Now we draw breath. We'll hold the line, no matter the cost. But the darkness laughed, a sound devoid of warmth or hope. Cost? You know nothing of cost. The fissure deepened, shadows spilling forth like tendrils of smoke, curling toward Tom. The young knight staggered, caught in the invisible grasp of the ancient curse that bound him. Hold fast, Aldrich commanded, stepping beside Tom, sword pointed at the creeping darkness. Don't let it take him. The keeper moved swiftly, chanting words in a language long forgotten, his hands weaving signs in the air that pulsed with raw power. The tendrils recoiled, but only briefly, as if the darkness was testing its bounds, pushing for weakness. Lena knelt, tracing the runes on the floor with trembling fingers. The seal is breaking faster than we thought. If it shatters, the darkness won't just escape this chapel. It will swallow the entire castle. Alara's voice cut through the mounting panic. We must renew the chain. Tom's blood is the key. He must willingly bind himself, or the darkness will consume us all. The weight of those words pressed on Tom, who sank to his knees, sweat pouring down his brow. His eyes closed tightly, as if willing away the terror that threatened to consume him. Aldrich felt a surge of desperation. Tom, look at me. You're stronger than this. We believe in you. From the shadows, the figure snarled and lunged, but before it could strike, a blinding light erupted from Tom's palm, scattering the darkness like ashes on the wind. The chapel trembled once more, but this time the light held steady, pushing back the abyss inch by agonizing inch. For a moment, hope blossomed. Then the ground shook violently. Aldrich stumbled, barely catching himself as the altar split apart, revealing an ancient chest carved with symbols of binding and sacrifice. The lid creaked open slowly, and from within, a cold mist rose, swirling with unnatural life. Alara's eyes darkened. The heart of a chain. It has awakened. The shadow figure screamed in fury, retreating to the edges of the chapel as the mist expanded, weaving between the knight's feet. The ancient magic was awakening, but so too was something darker, something older than even the shadows themselves. Tom's glow intensified, merging with the rising mist, his body trembling as the ancient power coursed through him. I feel it, he gasped. The curse, the chain, it's inside me. Aldrich gritted his teeth. Then fight it. Fight for all of us. But the battle was far from over. From the depths of the mist, a chilling voice echoed, one not heard before in their chants or battles. It was a voice of sorrow and rage, of sacrifice and regret. I am the beginning and the end, it whispered. The price paid, the debt owed. The knights froze, eyes wide with terror and recognition. The voice continued, growing louder, resonating within the very stones of the chapel. The chain binds not just the darkness, but the souls of those who forged it. To break it is to unleash the past's wrath. Aldrich's mind reeled. The chain was a prison, yes, but also a tomb, a trap for countless souls condemned to eternal vigilance. Lena's voice trembled as she spoke. The curse isn't just on Tom or the castle. It's on us all. Our ancestors' sins, their sacrifices, they bind us still. The shadow figure snarled, retreating to the darkness beyond the chapel, but its presence lingered like a poison. Alara's gaze met Tom's. You are the last hope and the last prisoner. What you choose will echo through generations. Aldrich looked around at the exhausted, determined faces of his comrades. They had faced horrors no man should bear, carried burdens heavier than their armor. But the truth was clear. This fight was not just against shadows or curses. It was a battle for their very souls. The storm outside raged on, thunder crashing as if the heavens themselves mourned the coming reckoning. And in the chapel, the ancient chain quivered, waiting for its final link. The darkness waited, patient and relentless. And Aldrich knew that the night ahead would change everything, or end them all. The chapel was heavy with silence, the kind that settles just before a storm breaks, thick and suffocating. Tom's body trembled as the light in his palm pulsed steadily, stronger now, as if the ancient power inside him was learning to be controlled. His eyes were closed, his breath ragged, every muscle tense with the weight of the choice before him. Around him, the knights stood in a tight circle, swords lowered but ready, watching not just the battle outside but the one raging within Tom's soul. Alara knelt beside him, her voice soft yet resolute. "You carry the blood of your ancestors, Tom. The chain is not a curse. It is a duty, a shield. You must bind the darkness once more, or it will swallow us all." The shadow figure lurked at the chapel's edge, snarling and gathering what little strength remained. But the darkness was weakened. It sensed the inevitable. The air shimmered with tension, as though the walls themselves held their breath. Tom's eyes snapped open. They were brighter now, filled with something fierce and calm all at once. "I understand," he said, voice steady. "I will bind the chain, not for sacrifice alone, but for hope." Aldrich stepped forward, sword raised, standing beside Tom as a silent promise of solidarity. The runes flared brilliantly, golden light flooding the chamber. Tom placed his palm over the ancient chest revealed beneath the altar. The cold mist rose again, but this time it was met with the warmth of the light, and it hissed, retreating. Then, with a deep, resonant hum, the chain appeared, not a physical thing, but a glowing thread of pure energy weaving through the chapel, binding the shadows and sealing the rift in the stone floor. The darkness screamed in fury, but could not break free. For a moment, silence. The storm outside eased, the thunder fading into distant rumbles. Tom collapsed to his knees, exhausted but alive. The glow in his palm faded, and with it, the weight seemed to lift from the chapel, from their hearts. Lena knelt beside Tom, tears of relief in her eyes. "You did it. You saved us." The keeper's helmet was lowered in respect. "The chain is renewed. The darkness is sealed, at least for now." Brant let out a long breath, sheathing his sword. "We held the line." Aldrich looked around, pride and sorrow mingling in his chest. They had survived the night, but the cost was written on every face. Then, as the knights began to lower their guard, the chapel grew cold again, colder than before. A faint whisper brushed against their ears, soft and distant. Tom looked up, confusion flickering across his face. The glowing chain thread shimmered, and suddenly, a new link appeared, one that pulsed with an eerie, unfamiliar light. It wasn't Tom's blood. It was something else. The shadow figure, thought vanquished, gave a low chuckle from the shadows, voice smooth and mocking. "You think this is the end? The chain renews, yes. But every chain has a master, and yours is not who you believe." Aldrich's heart sank. The ancient curse was not over. The true darkness was still out there, watching, waiting. The chapel doors slammed open with a gust of cold wind, revealing a figure stepping inside, cloaked, face hidden. The final piece of the puzzle, the true master of the chain. And the nightmare was just beginning. The sudden entrance of the cloaked figure sent a chill down Aldrich's spine that no battle scar or freezing wind ever could. The chapel's faint light flickered uncertainly, as if the very air hesitated to breathe. The figure moved with slow, deliberate steps, each footfall echoing ominously against the cold stone floor. There was no urgency, only a quiet command that demanded attention and respect, perhaps even fear. Tom tried to rise, but exhaustion weighed him down like a great stone. His breath came in shallow gasps as he struggled to steady himself. Lena moved swiftly to support him, her eyes fixed warily on the newcomer. "Who are you?" Aldrich demanded, voice steady but sharp, hand twitching toward his sword. Around him, the other knights tensed, their instincts honed through countless battles ready to spring. The figure stopped and slowly pulled back the hood, revealing a face both familiar and unrecognizable. It was a woman, but her skin was pale as ash, eyes dark pools swirling with something ancient and unreadable. A faint smile curled her lips, one that did not reach her eyes. "I am Celia," she said softly, her voice like a cold wind that cut through the room. "The last keeper before Alara, the one who failed to keep the chain." A murmur rippled through the knights, disbelief and shock battling on their faces. Alara's expression tightened, and for a moment, she seemed to shrink beneath the weight of her own guilt. "Celia, I thought you were lost." Celia's smile deepened, shadowed by bitterness. "Lost? No, I was bound. Bound by the same chain you all seek to protect. But I broke free, and now I have come to finish what I began." The air grew colder still, frost forming on the edges of the ancient tapestries. The glowing chain thread flickered, responding to her presence like a living thing sensing a predator. Tom's tired eyes narrowed. "Finish what you began? What do you mean?" Celia's gaze swept the room, sharp and calculating. The chain was never meant to protect the innocent. It was a trap to control power. Your ancestors believed they could bind the darkness, but they were fools. The true master of the chain is not the bloodline, not the knights. It is me. The chapel fell into stunned silence. Aldrich's fingers curled tighter around his sword hilt. The idea that everything they fought for was a lie struck like a dagger. Lena shook her head slowly. "You're wrong. We've sacrificed everything to keep this darkness at bay." Celia laughed, a sound that echoed like a funeral bell. "Sacrifice? No. You have been puppets in a game far older than you realize. The darkness is not what you should fear. It is what you can control. And I will." With a flick of her wrist, the glowing chain flared violently, snapping its bonds on the floor and surging upward like a living serpent. The tendrils wrapped around her arms, shimmering with unnatural light. Aldrich raised his sword. "We won't let you take this castle, where the power holds." The knights moved as one, weapons raised, but Celia was faster. The chain lashes whipped out, striking with blinding speed. Brant was thrown against the wall, groaning as he slid down the stone. Alara stepped forward, chanting fiercely, weaving counterspells into the air. The chapel shuddered as magic and will clashed. Tom pushed himself to his feet, determination reigniting in his gaze. "This ends now," he said, voice firm despite exhaustion. He held out his hand, and the pale green light sparked again, stronger, purer. Celia's eyes flickered with surprise. You still fight." The chain surged toward Tom, but instead of binding him, the light in his palm burst forth, severing the glowing tendrils one by one. The room was filled with blinding brilliance, the ancient magic of the chain responding not to control, but to true will. Aldrich joined Tom, sword raised, ready to defend until the last breath. Celia's expression twisted with rage and disbelief. "No, you cannot undo what has been set in motion." But the glowing chain began to unravel, thread by thread, dissolving into sparks that vanished like morning mist. The darkness screamed, a sound that seemed to split the stones themselves. The storm outside broke, a sudden downpour washing over the castle, as if the heavens themselves welcomed the cleansing. With a final cry, Celia staggered, the chain's power withdrawing, leaving her vulnerable and weakened. She fell to her knees, eyes wide with shock and despair. Tom approached cautiously, light still glowing softly in his hand. "It's over. The chain is broken." Celia shook her head slowly, a haunted look crossing her face. "You think breaking the chain ends the curse? No, it only sets the true darkness free." Before anyone could react, the floor beneath them trembled violently. A fissure cracked open again, wider and deeper than before, swallowing the light and plunging the chapel into a suffocating darkness. From the depths rose a shape, massive and writhing, an ancient evil long imprisoned and now unleashed by the breaking of the chain. Its eyes burned with malice, and its voice rumbled like the earth itself. "I'm the true master," it declared. "Freed at last. Your sacrifices mean nothing." The knights stood frozen in horror as the shadow engulfed the chapel, the last remnants of their lights snuffed out. Aldrich's heart hammered in his chest. The battle they thought was ending had only just begun. Tom gritted his teeth, raising his glowing palm once more. "We won't let it take everything." But deep inside, he knew the war for the castle, and their souls, was far from over. The ground continued to quake beneath their feet, and the very stones of the chapel seemed to groan as if remembering some ancient pain. Dust fell from the vaulted ceiling, and a few of the more fragile stained glass windows cracked, letting in slivers of the stormy daylight outside. The darkness that rose from the fissure in the floor had form now, less a shadow, more a shape. It was massive, not quite a creature and not quite a man, something in between. Its outline shifted constantly like smoke, trying to become solid. It loomed above them all, radiating a deep, crushing presence that pressed against every heart. Some of the knights dropped to one knee, overwhelmed by a terror they couldn't name. Others backed away instinctively, their instincts for battle utterly silenced. This thing, whatever it was, did not belong to their world. Tom could barely stand, but he held his ground. His arm shook under the weight of whatever lived in the light of his hand, the pale green glow flickering against the darkness. "What are you?" he asked, though the answer pressed at the edges of his mind like a forgotten dream. The creature turned toward him, and though it had no face, Tom felt its gaze pierce straight through him. The voice that followed was like a whisper from the bottom of a dry well, hollow and scraping. "I'm what the chain was made to contain. I'm the memory of war, of betrayal, of greed passed through blood and bound in silence. You gave me names, curse, plague, shadow, but I was always you." The words sent a coldness through the air that even fire wouldn't touch. Aldrich stepped forward beside Tom, lifting his sword though it shook in his grip. "We've faced war. We've faced death. We are not afraid of old legends and broken stories." The creature laughed, a horrible, low sound like crumbling rock. "You should be. Your stories were warnings, not lies." Suddenly, Celia, still on her knees, looked up at the creature. Her eyes were wild now, desperate. "You said I would rule if I broke the chain. You promised me power." The creature tilted what could have been its head. "I promised nothing. You heard what you wanted to hear. I only waited." And with that, the creature extended an arm, or something like an arm, towards Celia. Her scream was sharp and brief. The darkness engulfed her, and then there was nothing where she'd been. Not even ash. Aldrich moved without thinking, lunging at the creature with his blade. The steel passed through it as if through smoke, but he kept swinging, driven more by fury than logic. "This castle stood before you, and it will stand after you." The creature shifted again, and a part of it lashed out, sending Aldrich flying across the chapel. He hit the floor hard, groaning but still alive. Alara raised both hands and chanted. The last of her strength poured into a protective spell that formed a thin veil of light between the knights and the creature. "It held for now. Tom," she gasped, "it feeds on fear and memory. That's how it survived so long, even sealed. You must sever it, not with strength, but with choice." Tom looked to her, then down at the faint green light in his palm. It was dimmer now, pulsing slower, as if tired. He didn't fully understand it, but he knew this much. It was connected to something older than any sword or story. He turned back toward the creature. "You said you were us," he said quietly. "Then that means we can end you." The creature roared, its form swelling with rage, and the chapel's walls cracked as another tremor shook the floor. The ancient stones were beginning to give way. "I choose," Tom said, stepping forward, even as Lena tried to stop him. "I choose to let go. I choose to forgive the past." The green light surged. "I choose peace." And with that, he thrust his glowing palm into the creature's center. There was no explosion, no dramatic burst of light. Instead, the creature began to unravel, quietly, slowly, as if a great knot was being untied after centuries of tension. Its smoky form came apart strand by strand, dissolving into a gentle mist that floated upward like morning fog. The silence that followed was even heavier than the tension before. The knights stood stunned. The chapel groaned once more, and then it was still. No more quakes. No more darkness. Only the sound of the rain tapping against the broken glass. Tom collapsed, and this time he didn't rise. Lena rushed to him, falling to her knees. She pressed her hand to his chest and let out a cry when she felt a heartbeat. Faint, but still there. Alara moved slowly to the altar where the glowing chain once sat. There was nothing there now. No light, no markings, just smooth, empty stone. It's gone, she said softly. The chain, the curse, all of it. Aldrich limped over, blood on his forehead, but eyes alert. Not gone. Changed. Buried deeper. The knights helped each other up, one by one. No cheers, no celebrations. Just quiet relief and a knowledge that they had seen something few would ever believe. As dawn finally broke through the storm clouds, golden light streamed through the remaining stained glass, casting fractured colors across the cracked chapel floor. And far below, in the tunnels that twisted beneath the castle, something else stirred. Not a monster, not a curse, but something watching, waiting. The story wasn't over. It never truly was. The rain had stopped by the time they carried Tom out of the chapel. The skies above the castle had cleared into a strange, pale blue that felt too soft after everything that had just happened. The scent of wet stone and scorched air hung in the silence, but there was no more howling wind, no trembling beneath their feet. Just quiet, like the world itself had finally taken a deep breath after holding it for centuries. The knights moved slowly, not just from injury, but from the weight of what they had seen. Some limped. Some leaned on each other. None spoke. Not yet. Tom was alive, though barely. Alara tended to him with gentle hands and whispered reassurances, while Lena walked at his side, her fingers never letting go of his sleeve. Aldrich led them, his face lined with exhaustion, his eyes scanning the horizon like he was seeing the land for the first time. The birds had returned. That was something. By noon, they had made it back to the old hall where this all began. The fire was lit again, crackling in the hearth. Someone had brought bread and water. It felt strange to sit, stranger still to eat. But they did, slowly, as though trying to remember what normal looked like. No one said the word curse. Not anymore. Whatever it had been, curse, creature, memory, it was gone now. Or at least buried deeper, where it could no longer feed on the fears and regrets of the living. Aldrich stood near the window, staring out at the training yard where the next generation of squires would one day swing their wooden swords. So much of what we believed. He began, then let the sentence trail off. There was no easy way to finish it. Everything had changed, and yet the stones of the castle still stood. The halls were still here. Life would go on. Alara finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. It wasn't the chain that protected us. It was the choice to keep fighting, even when we didn't understand what we were up against. Lena nodded, brushing a loose curl from her cheek. We were never guarding some great power. We were guarding each other. That's what the knights were always meant to do. Brant, one of the younger knights who'd been thrown hard in the chapel, lifted his cup in a quiet toast. To the ones who came before us, and the ones who will never know what happened beneath their feet. The others lifted their cups too, solemn and tired and grateful. That night, Tom finally woke. His voice was rough, barely a whisper, but the smile that tugged at the edge of his mouth was real. Lena was the first to notice, nearly dropping her cup when she saw his eyes flutter open. "You're awake," she breathed, pressing his hand to her cheek. Tom's lips moved. "Did we win?" "You did," she said, smiling through her tears. "You chose peace." He didn't speak again for a while, just let his fingers curl gently around hers, as if reminding himself that she was real. The days that followed moved slowly. Repairs began on the chapel, though some of the older knights wanted to leave part of it untouched. A reminder, they said, that not all wounds should be buried. The chain, or what had once been the chain, left no trace. Alara searched the ruins carefully, but there was nothing, not even ash where Celia had stood. The townspeople returned to their routines, never quite sure what had happened that stormy night, but sensing that something had lifted. The air felt different now, lighter, cleaner. The castle no longer groaned in the wind. The bells rang again, and the children played in the courtyards without glancing over their shoulders. Aldrich met with the council. They would not keep the truth hidden, he decided, but they would not speak of monsters. Instead, they would speak of the cost of pride, of how easy it was to turn fear into tradition, and how important it was to question the stories were told, even the ones carved in stone. As for Tom, he did not return to his squire duties. He walked the halls quietly now, often alone, watching the sunrise from the tower steps or sitting under the old trees by the edge of the woods. He spoke little, but when he did, people listened, not because of what he'd done, but because of how he'd changed. There was peace in him now, a kind that didn't come from victory, but from surviving what he never thought he could. Lena stayed at his side, though she still helped train the younger pages. Sometimes they'd sit together by the hearth in the evening, reading from old books, their hands always close enough to touch. Alara eventually left the castle, her mission complete. She said she needed to find out if the darkness had ever touched other places, other people. But she left behind a collection of notes and a warning in simple ink. Don't wait for chains to bind the past. Choose to let it go. Years passed. The knights grew older. Some left, others joined. But the heart of the order changed. It became less about defending a legend and more about protecting each other, serving those who couldn't wield a sword. Fewer songs were sung about glory, more about loyalty and the quiet bravery of healing instead of harming. Visitors would still ask about the great chain, and the knights would smile and shake their heads. Just stories, they'd say. There are better ones to tell. And though no one spoke of it out loud, every once in a while, someone would glance toward the chapel ruins at dusk and wonder if something still lingered in the cracks. Not darkness, but a reminder. That being a knight wasn't about strength or armor. It was about choice, about facing your own fears, and choosing every day to be better than the story you were handed. In the end, the curse that haunted them wasn't some creature or spell. It was forgetting why they'd stood side by side in the first place. Now, they remembered, and so the castle stood, quiet and strong, not because of its walls, but because of the people who called it home.